This is Eye of the Storm, a St. John's video series presented by NOBULL. Welcome back to another edition of Eye of the Storm. We're going to break it all down following the Red Storm improving to 2-1 on the season after they had a strong finish against William & Mary on Saturday. And we're going to look at what stood out, what still needs work, and what's ahead with Bucknell coming to Carnesecca Arena on Thursday night. Of course, we're going to go over all of this with the man who covers the team like nobody else, the one and only Zach Braziller here of the New York Post. Zach, what's going on, man?
What's up, man? How are you?
I'm good. I'm doing good. You're about to take a trip away from us again soon.
That's right.
A little holiday trip. This is like the every year thing. I'm a little bit jealous about that. A little bit jealous. But we're going to talk about the Johnnies because you wrote about Dylan Darling recently and the growing importance that he has to this team, including stating that he might be St. John's best offensive player, or most important offensive player, we should say. What specific areas of the half-court offense does he impact the most? And also, what stood out to you most from his performance against William & Mary?
Yeah, their offense when he's in plays with pace. There's more direction because he's the only traditional point guard on this roster. And there's been talk of different guys, Ian Jackson, Ozias Sellers, even Dylan Mitchell as a point forward playing that role. But that's stuff those guys have never done. And he is a point guard. He's been a point guard, and he kind of understands the position. And look, I don't think it's crazy. He's not one of their 5 best players or most talented players, but their offense has more direction. It has more pace. They have someone who kind of understands who understands the position. And right now, it's pretty clear he's the guy who's going to run the show. Now, look, in a month, 2 weeks, I'm not saying that's going to be different. But I think right now, when you have so many new pieces and they're clearly a work in progress, Pitino trusts him and feels like he's the answer right now. I liked how hard he played in the second half against William & Mary. Now, look, there's a question. He's not a great athlete. There are major questions how he's going to do against a top-notch team. Remember, he had the calf strain. He didn't play against Alabama. So Las Vegas is going to be really his first chance against high-caliber opposition. And we'll see. Michigan, I thought he was decent in the exhibition, but this is going to be a different world for him. Iowa State, who's a terrific defensive team, plays traps, uses a lot of pressure. That's going to be a big challenge for him. He's obviously not big. He's around 6 feet, maybe 5'11". So that's going to be interesting to see kind of how he performs at that level. But one thing to know, he's a tough kid. He's the son of an NFL linebacker. Yep. He started at Washington State, didn't really work. He had a bad injury his sophomore year, which, so he wasn't quite ready as a freshman. But it'll be interesting because, look, they have some really highly rated guys in the backcourt with Ian Jackson and Joe Sansanin. And right now, both those guys are coming off the bench. Do I expect that to continue into December and January? I don't know. But as Pitino has shown, he's going to play the guys that earn it. He's not, just because these guys are so-called highly rated, he's not just going to say you're starting no matter what.
Right.
And Darling has earned it. The offense flows better with him right now. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
I want to follow up with you on this. Let's say we see him do well in Bucknell and then next week in Vegas. How big is that for St. John's if he does play well and saying, okay, he can solidify and be this traditional starting point guard for them, and you trust him in conference play or against more elite competition?
Yeah, look, it's big. Forget, no disrespect, but Bucknell is, St. John's will be a 25-point favorite. I'm not.
Right.
I expect them to win that game relatively easy. It's really next. Vegas is so intriguing for this team. You have the Darling factor. You have, they played, if you count the Michigan exhibition, they played 2 really high-caliber teams, and they lost both. Now, both were close games, especially the Michigan game that went to overtime. But they left a lot to be desired in those games. They didn't rebound the ball well. The defense was obviously an issue, especially in the Alabama game. So next week is a big challenge. And, I think Iowa State, as good as they are defensively, I think St. John's matches up better with them than Alabama because Alabama has those just tremendous guards that gave St. John's so much trouble. And look, St. John's didn't play well in that game. I don't think there's any doubt. They were in it late, but they didn't play a good game.
Yeah.
And so, next week's interesting. Iowa State, then you have a Baylor team who's down, who's got a lot of talent still, but it's not a top 15 team like it's been for the last several years. And then you don't know. Then the third game will probably be against another high-quality team. So next week is really important, especially when you consider the Big East isn't doing great, and you need some good non-conference wins if you want a good seed. So, they still have Ole Miss and Kentucky after Vegas, but Vegas Vegas is really important for this team. I don't think there's any question about that.
Yeah, it's going to be important. We're going to get to that a little bit later. But following the Alabama game that you just mentioned, one through line I've seen in your coverage and your reporting with Pitino has been his demand for greater consistency. He's been asking for that. So after the William & Mary game, where St. John's had a pretty good second half there, what part of the team's performance do you think that he's still most fixated on them cleaning up? What do you think that he's looking at and saying, hey, they need more work here?
Rebounding still. I say defense. I mean, first half they did not play well. They're up 5. A team they were favored to beat by 29, and the second half was terrific. They 54-26. They played how you thought they would play, but that first half they didn't have the energy, they didn't have the urgency, they weren't sharp. And the second half was like a different team. They really defended. They got William & Mary's not a bad mid-major. They're picked 4th in the CAA. They're a decent team that if you let them get comfortable and do what they do, shoot threes, back cuts, and all that, they could give you some problems. And they did for a half. I thought the second half was good. Yeah, it's a team right now that's playing in spurts. Alabama, they had some good stretches. Didn't finish the game well. I thought Quinnipiac was pretty good for the most part. But yeah, that's the thing. Everyone wants to happen right away. It's a new team. The one thing I've written about this is people kind of are kind of romanticizing last year's team, what that team was in November or December. Mm-hmm. Last year's team didn't take off till mid-January. Yeah. It took time, and this, I think this team is further along than last year's team. I know some people might disagree, but I do. I mean, I think this team is definitely further along. Now they have to be because their schedule is tougher, but I think people forget, look, each of Pitino's, this is his 3rd season now, each of his 3 seasons, he's had very different rosters every year. It takes time. Alabama had 4 of their 5 stars were guys who were back. Iowa State next week, their 3 best players are all returning players. Yes, a lot of teams are dealing with crazy upheaval, but there are teams that have a lot of back, and St. John's really only has 1 key guy back at Ejiofor. So it's probably not going to happen as fast as people want. That doesn't mean this team cannot still win big games, and I think they need to, to me, it's next week you want to go 2-1. Would you love 3-0? Of course. But you really want to go 2-1 and build some real momentum.
Yeah, it's a process, but fans sometimes always very impatient. But speaking of fans, they always have their eye in the future. And the Johnnies recently added a top 50 recruit, Adam Oumiddoch. What can you tell us about his game? And does the recruiting success of St. John's getting a top 50 guy here, does that reflect the current state of the program's direction under Pitino here?
Yeah, I'm going to call him AO.
AO, you're giving him a nickname already?
I think that's when we were doing the story, his guy said he calls him AO. So
Let's go with AO.
I'm going AO because I'm not even going to try to butcher the last name.
I hope I didn't butcher your last name, Adam. I hope that.
Yeah, no, look, it's a good addition. He's one person told you he's one of the best scorers at the high school level. He's got size. He shoots the 3 really well. Plays for overtime elite. It's a look. They're obviously annually going to be heavily going to the transfer market. That's obviously still going to be the focus, but they want to bring in a few high school kids a year who they think who can contribute but also develop over time. Look at late last spring they brought in Kelvin Odie. He was a top 75 kid. Not really playing a ton yet, but they really like him. He's tough, physical. Now, AO is a little different. He's more of an offensive player, where Odie is more of kind of like a defender, rebounder, guy right now more than a scorer. But yeah, I mean, the focus is still the transfer portal, obviously, and they want to keep a lot of guys from this year's team. But yeah, they want to dip their toe in the high school market too, and they beat some good schools. He told me he picked St. John's over Villanova. He also had Oregon and LSU were in the mix, Illinois. So yeah, they beat out some really good schools for him.
Huge for the Johnnies there. Looked at some of the tape on AO. He looks pretty good. Good offensive player. Can shoot the rock pretty well. So not bad at all whatsoever. Now the Alabama game, I want to go back to that because it left what you call the lingering reminder for this team. What do you believe the team took from that still applies going into this matchup against Bucknell, even though we know they're going to be 25-point favorites? So like you said, what do you think they took from that game that still applies going into this one?
I think it was a reminder of how far they have to go defensively. Especially for in the backcourt, where it just really struggled defending. I thought Alabama played really well, hit some huge shots, some tough shots. But yeah, St. John's didn't play well. And I understand Dylan Darling might not have made a difference on the defensive end, but on offensive end he would have. I'm not saying St. John's wins the game, but remember they were down 11 a few times. They made a run. They got up 2 with I think it was about 7-8 minutes left, and the offense really struggled down the stretch. And I think if you have Darling in the way he's playing, at least directing things and getting the ball to the right people, that maybe down the stretch it's a little different. Not saying they're going to win that game because they lost that game because of defense. They got out rebounded. So let's, but I do think he helps them. I know there's no question. I mean, I wrote about the other day. They've outscored the opposition in the 2 games he's played. Obviously, low majors, Quinnipiac, William Mary. St. John's outscored the opposition 54 points in his 48 minutes. And then they've only outscored the opposition by 6 in the other 72 minutes he hasn't played. Now, 40 of those minutes were Alabama, so you gotta
look at that with the opponent.
Take that into account. But there's no doubt they have looked like a better offensive team with him in there. Now, it's a balancing act because certain teams he's going to struggle with defending. There's no doubt. He's small. He's not necessarily a great athlete, but I just like the pace he plays with. I like his toughness. He's fearless. He's got that linebacker mentality that comes from his dad. Great guy, by the way. Former Jet. Actually, when the Jets were good, his dad was a Jet, which is it's so long ago.
That is a long time ago. Nobody in New York sports remembers that anymore.
James Darling was on the Chad Pennington teams, which were a really fun Jet teams.
That was the last good era of Jets football. Not to
we got to give Rex credit. Let's give Rex credit.
Sorry, my bad. Sorry,
but
sorry
before
about
Rex,
the 09 and 2010 teams.
Right. But he's a tough kid. And look, I'm not saying he's going to be a 30-minute game guy. Like he played 31 against William Mary. I'm not saying that. Look, to me, their ceiling is really going to depend on Jackson, Sannon playing up to their ability. And and right now, Pitino's basically challenging them. He's saying, look, you got to earn it. I'm not just going to play you 30 minutes because people say you guys are NBA prospects, because you were highly rated high school recruits. Like, I got to see it. And so he's challenging them, which is what he does. And we'll see how these guys respond. Yeah. And they play better. It's probably going to be less minutes for Darling. But right now, the offense runs better with him. There's no doubt. Next week's going to be I'm fascinated to see how he's going to do against high-caliber opposition.
Yeah, they've got to do that. And that kind of goes to where I wanted to shift this to, going back to the guards, because Pitino's been pushing the guards as everybody. We know it's defensively, particularly with Jackson and Sannon. What are you keeping your eye on with those guys? Is it just defending on the perimeter? What are you going to be keeping your eye on with that group of guards for St. John's?
Yeah, it's effort. It's not just thinking I'm out here to score. That's one thing he said about both of us. Like they need to understand, scoring doesn't mean you have a good game. It's doing everything. It's rebounding. It's getting assists. It's steals. It's mixing it up inside. Sharing the ball. The points will come, and that's, I think, one thing they're trying to hammer home to these guys is they need them to understand not to worry about offense and not just play the right way and play the way he wants them to play, and it's going to come. And he wants them to do more. I feel like Sannon has been better. I thought he played solid against William Mary, especially in that second half. He had a really nice dunk, some assists. He looks like he's clearly making an effort to do other things. But there's no question these guys' talent. They're elite talents, but they're clearly adjusting to what he's asking them to do.
After Bucknell, we kind of been talking about this all through this conversation, but Zach's annual early season trip going to Las Vegas. Johnnies, they're going to be playing in the 2025 Players Era Championship. They're going to take on, as Zach mentioned, Iowa State and Baylor next Monday and Tuesday, respectively. How do you believe, it sounds like you really feel like this non-conference tournament is going to prepare the Red Storm for conference play and what is to come ahead? This is a big test for them coming up. How do you feel like it's going to prepare them for conference play coming up?
Yeah, I mean, they're probably not going to play a team as good defensively as Iowa State again this year. At least, especially not in the regulars. In the league season, there's no one, as I think UConn's very good. UConn's not as good defensively as Iowa State. Iowa State annually is one of the best defensive teams in the country. They block shots. They really pressure the ball. They trap. Now, they're not nearly as good offensively. I think St. John's matches up better with them than Alabama. They're getting real tests. Alabama's probably got the best backcourt St. John's will face all year. Iowa State might be the best defensive team they've faced all year. later on, Kentucky, I don't know if there's a bigger team than in the country than Kentucky. Like, so these are all really good tests for them, but you want to win some, you got to win some of them, or they're gonna really depend on having to be incredible again in the conference season to get a good seed. So like, you know, I think so they're gonna have 6 high major games. They're 0-1 right now. To me, 3-3 puts you in a good spot. 4-2 you'd be golden, but 3-3 to me should be the goal right now. If you go 4-2, that's great, but if you can go 3-3, you know, you would have 3 quality wins, and you're in a good spot now if you have a good league season to really have a good seed. To me, that should be the goal. And yeah, it's going to be a good test. You know, I wouldn't say the Alabama look, they lost. It's a results business, you know. So, but I wouldn't say they failed that test. I just think they just didn't play. They didn't bring the kind of effort they needed to win that game. And Alabama played great.
It did.
Alabama played phenomenal. Their guards made shot after shot after shot. Some of that was the St. John's defense. Some of that's Alabama's got some NBA players. So yeah, I'm very intrigued just to see how this team responds, you know, for these next series of tests, because it's big. You know, like I said, I think they're ahead of last year's team, but see, last year's team was able to like work through things because they didn't face this kind of schedule.
Yeah,
you know, they had the 1-2 trip in Bahamas. But outside of that, you know, they played Kansas State, who wasn't a very good team. That was their other high major game and non-conference game. And so, like, they had time to kind of figure things out, and they were able to get going in January. But this team is different where they have this trip. They play Ole Miss, who's very good. They play Kentucky, who's very good. Like, they don't have as much time to kind of find themselves. So, like, this is a big week for them to kind of start to build momentum. You know, if you go 2-1 here, 3-0 you would love, but 2-1 you start to build that momentum and feel good about yourself.
Yeah, get a couple of good wins in Vegas. Give Zach a good time in Vegas where he'll see some Johnnies wins, hopefully. But first up, Johnnies have Bucknell at Carnesecca Arena on Thursday night. Zach Braziller will be there. I should be in the building as well, too. That is the great Zach Braziller. I'll hopefully see him one more time before he heads to Vegas. I'm Dexter Henry. We'll catch you next time on Eye of the Storm.